means that it's distilled from fermented grains. Bourbon means that the recipe of those grains contains a majority corn. Bourbon is a type of corn whiskey. If it's not at least 51% corn in the recipe, it's not bourbon, it's some other type of whiskey. Now, we used to have a display that I got to point at to talk about all of our different mash bills, but they painted over it after the flood, so it's going to be a little bit abstract while I kind of talk about the different recipes that we use. But we have about 4 different whiskey mash bills that we use all the time. Mash bill number 1 is a low rye bourbon mash bill. That means that it's majority corn to make it a bourbon. We add malted barley to help with the mashing and fermentation process, and we use rye as a secondary flavor grain. Rye tends to add some spice, give it a note, some heat, some kick, but that mash bill number 1, as I mentioned, is a low rye. So there's a whole lot of corn, just a little bit of rye, which may make those products sweeter than some other bourbons you may have had somewhere else. Mash bill number 1 is going to be products like Benchmark, Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare. Those are all considered mash bill number 1 products. Mash bill number 2 is another bourbon mash bill. It is an older mash bill for us. There is a little less corn, a little more rye, which may make mash bill number 2 legally distinct from mash bill number 1. Mash bill number 2 typically becomes Blanton's Ancient Age, Elmer T. Lee. Those are all considered mash bill number 2 products. Then the third bourbon mash bill we use all the time is our Weller mash. And instead of using rye as a secondary flavor grain, take all that rye out and they put wheat in instead. Wheat makes the product a little softer, possibly a little sweeter as well. The Weller mash, of course, becomes all the Weller bourbons, but it also becomes all of the Van Winkle bourbons as well. And then the fourth whiskey mash bill we use all the time is not a bourbon mash bill at all. It's actually our rye whiskey mash bill. So instead of being majority corn in the recipe to make it a bourbon, we use majority rye to make it a rye whiskey. Now, we do typically use corn as a secondary flavor grain for most of our rye whiskeys, which may make ours a little sweeter than some others you may have had somewhere else. Now, as I mentioned, I used to have a display to make that make a lot more sense. But did that still track at all? That makes sense for everybody? Okay. Yeah. Any questions about our mash bills at all before we start talking about something else? Okay, then we'll go ahead and start to talk a little bit about our history. So our history as a licensed distillery starts around 1870 or so. One of the first licensed distilleries built on site was built around that time by E.H. Taylor Jr. Now, E.H. Taylor Jr. had studied abroad in Europe. He saw some of the new technology they were using as part of the Industrial Revolution, as well as a lot of the old traditions they were still keeping alive, and he wanted to bring all that back here to shake up the American whiskey industry. One thing that he saw while he was over there is that they always use copper in their stills. And copper acts as a filter that pulls sulfides out that the yeast makes. If you leave the sulfides in, they make the whiskey smell like dirty cabbage whiskeys. Oh, it can go in its own, but the copper